He spent 3 years building a quiet life after everything fell apart. It took her exactly 11 seconds to destroy it. If you've ever told yourself that being alone was safer than being hurt again, the story is going to hit you somewhere you didn't expect. Stay until the end. Hit like drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along, because what happens between these two people is something I think a lot of us have been waiting to see. Nathan Holloway was 43 years old, and he had exactly two things figured out: how to make his daughter laugh before school, and how to keep the rest of the world at a manageable distance. Everything else was still a work in progress. He lived in a sand-colored craftsman house on Mercer Lane, a quiet street in a mid-sized Virginia city where the neighbors mostly kept to themselves, and the biggest drama of any given week was whether old Mr. Pacheco had let his hedges grow past the property line again. The street had a rhythm to it that Nathan appreciated. Predictable. Orderly. The same four cars leaving at the same time each morning, the same woman 2 doors down walking her poodle at 7:15 with a coffee cup in one hand and earbuds in both ears, the same amber light settling over the oak trees every evening in a way that made everything look a little more peaceful than it probably was. Nathan had chosen this street deliberately. He'd chosen this whole life deliberately, actually. The remote consulting work and database architecture that kept him home most days, the grocery trips on Wednesday afternoons when the store was half empty, the Friday night routine of homemade pizza and a movie Emma got to pick without negotiation. He'd built this life the way someone builds a house after the first one burns down. Carefully. With a lot of attention to which walls were load-bearing. 3 years. That's how long he'd been doing this. 3 years since Julia had packed 2 suitcases and a box of her grandmother's dishes and left him standing in the kitchen of their old house in Richmond with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand and no real argument left to make. She hadn't left for someone else. That would have been simpler, in a way. Something clear to be angry about. She'd left because she said she felt like she was disappearing inside the marriage, like the life they'd built together was perfectly comfortable and completely airless, and that she needed to find out who she was before she forgot entirely. Nathan had listened to all of it. He'd understood parts of it. He'd spent the better part of a year trying to understand the rest. And somewhere in the middle of that process, he'd stopped sleeping well, developed a habit of going quiet at dinner parties, and moved himself and Emma to Mercer Lane to start again. Emma was 9 now. She'd been 6 when her parents sat her down and explained, in the careful rehearsed language of 2 adults trying very hard not to damage their child, that Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different houses from now on. Emma had listened to all of it with her head tilted slightly to one side, the way she always did when she was processing something complicated, and then she'd said, "Does that mean I get 2 bedrooms?" And both her parents had laughed in that specific broken way that's mostly relief and partly grief, and that had been, more or less, the beginning. She was a good kid. Better than Nathan probably deserved, honestly. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn streak, and she read above her grade level, and she had opinions about everything, and she had not yet reached the age where she'd learned to hide them. Nathan loved her with the kind of intensity that occasionally frightened him. The raw, desperate love of a parent who knows exactly how much there is to lose. He thought about that sometimes at night, when the house was quiet and he was lying in bed watching the ceiling. How much he had. How close it all lived to the edge of things going wrong. This was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything started. Nathan was at the kitchen table, laptop open, cup of coffee slowly getting cold on his left, a documentation file he was supposed to be updating on the screen in front of him. Emma had already been walked to the bus stop and deposited safely onto the 740, which meant he had approximately 6 hours before he needed to be functional again in a parenting capacity. He was using none of those 6 hours productively. He was staring out the kitchen window at the house across the street. The Hennessy house, everyone on the block still called it, even though the Hennessy's had moved to Scottsdale 2 years ago, and the house had sat vacant since, cycling through a couple of short-term rental arrangements that never stuck. It was a nice house, 2 stories, white and gray, a porch with actual columns that was slightly too formal for the neighborhood, but had grown on Nathan over time. He'd gotten used to it being empty. The quiet face of it across the street felt almost companionable by now. Except this morning, there was a moving truck in the driveway. Not a full truck. One of the smaller ones, the kind that suggested either a single person or someone who traveled light. 3 men in gray t-shirts were carrying boxes and furniture pieces inside with the practiced efficiency of people who did this every day and found it deeply boring. A lamp, a rolled-up rug in pale green, a kitchen table in dark wood, standard stuff. Nothing that explained why Nathan had been sitting here for 15 minutes watching instead of doing his job. Then she came out. She walked out of the front door of the Hennessy house and stood on the porch with a clipboard in her hand, and Nathan genuinely lost track of what he was doing. She was tall. Not unusually so, but the way she stood made her seem taller than she probably was. Shoulders back, weight balanced, no fidgeting. She was in dark trousers and a camel-colored coat that had clearly not been purchased at any store Nathan had ever been inside. Her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and was probably the opposite of that. She was scanning something on the clipboard. Then she looked up and directed one of the moving men with a gesture that was economical and specific, and he changed direction immediately, without question. She was not, Nathan thought, the sort of person who usually ended up on Mercer Lane. He picked up his coffee cup. He realized it was empty. He didn't get up to refill it. And then she looked directly at his kitchen window, not in the vague, distracted way that people glance at houses. She looked at him, specific and deliberate, and even from across the street, even through the glass, he could see the slight shift in her expression that was unmistakably amusement. Nathan looked down at his laptop immediately. He typed 3 letters of nothing into the documentation file. His ears felt warm. When he looked back up 2 minutes later, she was still there, but she was back on her clipboard. The moment, apparently, had passed. He told himself it was nothing. He closed the documentation file. He opened it again. He thought about getting more coffee and didn't move. He didn't see her again until Thursday. He'd mostly stopped thinking about her by then. That's what he told himself, at least. He'd thought about her a normal amount, which was approximately 3 times on Tuesday, twice on Wednesday when he saw a light in the upstairs window of the Hennessy house around 9 p.m., and once on Thursday morning when Emma asked at breakfast why there were boxes on the neighbor's porch across the street. And Nathan explained that someone new had moved in, and Emma had immediately said, "What are they like?" And Nathan had said, "I don't know, I haven't met them." And Emma had given him the look she'd been giving him since she was approximately 7 years old that communicated she found his social habits questionable. He was coming back from a walk. He walked about 2 miles every morning after the bus came, not for any noble fitness reason, but because it was the one part of the day where nobody needed anything from him, and he could turn his brain down to a manageable volume. When he came around the corner of Mercer Lane and nearly walked into her. She was coming from the other direction, also on foot, in running clothes this time, a small earphone in one ear, and she saw him about a half second before he registered that the woman from the moving truck was standing directly in his path. He stopped. She stopped. There was a moment. "The watcher," she said. Nathan blinked. "I'm sorry?" From the window. She tilted her head slightly. "Tuesday morning. I counted 3 full minutes." "I was working," Nathan said. "I wasn't watching. I was just—" "The window faces that direction." "The window does," she agreed, perfectly pleasantly. "But your face was pointed at me." She shifted the earphone out of her ear and looked at him with an expression that wasn't hostile exactly, but wasn't quite friendly either. It was more like she was deciding something. "Camille Sterling." She held out her hand. "Nathan Holloway," he said, and shook it. Her handshake was not what he expected. Firm, but not the performed firmness of someone who'd been told to do it that way. Just her actual grip. "I live across the street." "I know," she said. "You have a daughter, about 9? She was wearing a backpack with a frog on it on Tuesday morning." "Emma," he said. "Yeah." "I like the frog." There was a pause. A car went by. Nathan was aware that this conversation was going slightly wrong without being sure how to write it. "Welcome to the street," he finally said. "It's a good block, quiet. There's a guy 2 houses down, Pacheco. He'll bring you tomatoes in August whether you want them or not. Just accept them." Something shifted in her face, the edge of a real smile. "That's good advice." "Years of experience." She put the earphone back in. "I need to finish my run." She glanced at him once more with that same assessing quality that he was beginning to think was just the way she looked at everything. Try not to stare too long from the window, Holloway. It's a small street. She ran past him. Nathan stood on the sidewalk for a moment, then kept walking home. He was not thinking about anything in particular. The dog situation happened on a Saturday, and it was genuinely not Nathan's fault. He'd been in the backyard, raking leaves in that half-committed way he had when a task was necessary but not urgent, when he heard the specific fast footfall sound of a medium-sized dog running hard on pavement, and looked up to see a golden retriever come flying around the corner of the house and skid to a stop in his yard, tail going at an unsustainable speed, entire body vibrating with the excitement of having successfully escaped from wherever it was supposed to be. The dog looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the dog. "Okay," Nathan said. The dog, he could see a tag, blue, round, some kind of stylized initial on it, collapsed onto its back in the leaves and presented its belly with complete confidence. "You're somebody's," Nathan said, crouching down to check the tag. "Monty." An address which was, he looked up, directly across the street. "Of course you are." He picked up Monty, which was a project because Monty had no interest in being held with dignity and preferred to hang upside down over Nathan's arm like a damp towel, and carried him across the street and knocked on the door of the Hennessy house. Camille opened it still in running clothes, different ones from Thursday, but the same general quality of person. She looked at Monty, then at Nathan, then at Monty again. "He appeared in my yard," Nathan said. "The gate," Camille said, mostly to herself. She took Monty, who immediately attempted to climb over her shoulder and inspect the porch railing. "I ordered a new latch for the back gate. It's not here yet." "They get out faster than you'd think." "He's done it twice already." She was wrestling Monty into a more functional position, with only partial success. "I've had him 2 years. He's never once acted like the yard was anything but a suggestion." "Emma's been asking for a dog," Nathan said. He was not sure why he said this. "I keep telling her we'll see." "Don't," Camille said. "Don't what?" "Don't do the we'll see thing. Either you want a dog or you don't. We'll see just teaches kids that adults say things they don't mean." She looked at him with that direct quality she had, and then something in her expression shifted slightly, like she'd heard how that sounded. "That came out harsher than I intended." "No," Nathan said. "You're probably right, actually." She looked at him like she hadn't expected that response. "Emma would tell you the same thing," he said. "She's 9, but she has very clear opinions on parental honesty." "Smart kid." "Occasionally inconvenient," Nathan said. "But yes." Monty had gotten his nose into Camille's coat collar and was investigating something up there. She pulled him back with the automatic exasperation of someone who'd had this exact fight before. "Do you want to come in?" she said. "I have coffee on. It's the least I can offer after your dog retrieval services." Nathan hesitated. Across the street, his laptop was sitting open, his documentation file still stubbornly untouched. "Sure," he said. The inside of her house was not what he'd expected, and he wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. It was mostly unpacked, which surprised him. She'd only moved in 4 days ago. Efficient. The furniture was good quality without being showy about it, a lot of clean lines and neutral tones, except for one wall in the living room that was going to be painted a deep blue, based on the swatch taped to it and the 2 unopened gallons of paint on the floor beneath. A bookshelf that was maybe a third organized and 2/3 still in boxes. A kitchen that was notably fully set up, everything out, everything placed. "You unpack the kitchen first," he said, accepting the mug she held out. "Always." She poured her own. "You can survive with boxes in the living room. You can't function without a real kitchen." "That's a reasonable philosophy. It's the only reasonable philosophy." She leaned against the counter. Monty had been deposited into the backyard through the door in the kitchen and was now visible through the window, investigating the fence with extreme suspicion. "So what do you do, Nathan Holloway, besides watch moving trucks and return escaped dogs?" "Database architecture," he said. "Remote consulting." "Meaning you work from home?" "Yes." And before the obvious next question, yes, I chose it partly because of Emma. Her school's a 10-minute walk. I needed the flexibility. He said this in the way he'd gotten used to saying it, preemptively, because people almost always followed "you work from home" with something that was technically a question but was actually a comment about whether that was a real job or a real choice. The expectation was there in Camille's face before he'd finished the sentence, and then it dissolved, replaced by something that looked more like recognition. I spent 4 years building my company out of a one-bedroom apartment while my sister watched my... She stopped. Something crossed her face, quick and controlled. While I managed other obligations, she finished, and something in the shift of that sentence made Nathan not ask about it. "What's the company?" he said instead. "Sterling Group, commercial real estate development, primarily Mid-Atlantic. We also have a consulting division for nonprofit facility planning, which is the part I like most and the part that makes the least money." She said this last bit with a dry humor that landed naturally. "How many people?" 83 full-time right now. We're about to bring on 12 more if a Durham project goes through." She sipped her coffee. "You're doing the math." "I'm not. You are. It's fine. You're wondering how someone who runs a company of that size ends up on Mercer Lane, Virginia, in a house with a faulty gate latch and a dog who treats property lines as approximate guidelines." Nathan considered this. "Honestly," he said, "I was mostly just surprised you moved in at all. That house has been empty for 2 years. I'd gotten used to it. I grew up about 40 minutes from here. I wanted..." She stopped again, but this time it seemed like a different kind of pause, more deliberate. "I wanted somewhere that felt like mine. Not a building I own. A place." Nathan understood that in a way that he didn't try to explain, because some things you either understand or you don't, and no amount of explaining helps. "It's a good street," he said. "You'll like it." Camille looked at him. "You said that already. The first time we talked." "It bears repeating." She almost smiled. Monty scratched at the back door. "You should probably get back to your documentation file," she said. Nathan looked at her. "How did you..." "You're in consulting. You work remotely. It's a Saturday and you're still in whatever clothes you grabbed first." She nodded at his shirt, which was, now that he thought about it, inside out. He had not noticed that until this moment. "Deadline you've been avoiding." "Thursday," he said. "Go work on it." He took his mug. "Thanks for the coffee." "Thanks for Monty." She looked at the dog through the window and her expression softened in a way that she probably didn't know was visible. "He's an idiot, but I'd be fairly lost without him." "The best ones usually are," Nathan said. He walked back across the street, checked the inside-out shirt in his hallway mirror, changed it, and sat down at his laptop. He got 3 pages of documentation done in an hour, which was more than he'd managed in 2 days. He didn't think too hard about why. Emma met Camille the following weekend, and it went exactly as well and as badly as Nathan had quietly feared. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Nathan had made the mistake of letting Emma know that the new neighbor was a CEO of an actual company, because Emma had recently decided that she was going to be either a marine biologist or a businesswoman when she grew up, and she had questions about both careers that Nathan was not always qualified to answer. He was raking the front yard, the same leaves, honestly, mostly redistributed at this point, when Emma came out the front door, looked across the street, and said, "Is that her?" "Emma." "The CEO, lady." Camille was on her porch with a phone to her ear, and she looked up at Emma's voice, which had some carrying power behind it. "Inside voice," Nathan said. "We're outside." He didn't have a response to that. Camille lowered the phone and looked across the street with an expression that was somewhere between amused and uncertain. Emma waved. Camille, after a beat, waved back. "Can we go say hi?" Emma said. "She's on the phone." She put the phone down. She had, in fact, put the phone down and was watching the two of them with what looked like genuine interest. Nathan looked at his rake. He looked at Emma's face, which was doing the thing it did when she'd already decided something and was waiting for him to arrive at the same conclusion. 5 minutes, he said. Emma was across the street before he'd finished the sentence. He followed at a pace that he was aware probably communicated more reluctance than was attractive, and by the time he reached the porch steps, Emma had already introduced herself, asked Camille what a CEO actually did on a daily basis, and informed Camille that her name was Emma Julia Holloway, and she was 9 3/4, and that she had read 2 books about business strategy from the adult section of the public library. Camille looked at Emma with an expression Nathan had not seen on her face before. It wasn't the careful, pleasant mask people sometimes put on with other people's children. It was something more direct. Interested. "Which ones?" she said. Emma listed them. Camille said, "The second one's better than the first, but the guy who wrote the first one is more honest about when things go wrong." Emma processed this with her head tilt. "Do you like it?" Camille asked. "Business strategy. I like the problem-solving parts," Emma said. "Not the part where you have to be in lots of meetings." "Nobody likes that part," Camille said, "including the people running the meetings." Emma laughed. It was her real laugh, not her polite one, and Nathan felt something tighten slightly in his chest that he chose not to examine. "What's your company do exactly?" Emma said. "We build things. Buildings mostly, and we help organizations figure out what spaces they need to do their work well." "Like hospitals?" "Hospitals, yes. Community centers, schools sometimes." "My school needs a bigger library," Emma said with some conviction. "Most schools do." Emma glanced at her father, then back at Camille, with the calculating look of someone assembling information. "Are you married?" "Emma," Nathan said. "What?" "I was just asking." "That's not—" "You don't ask people that." "Why not?" "It's not rude, it's just a question." Emma looked back at Camille expectantly. Camille's expression shifted, just slightly, a brief tightening that smoothed back out quickly. "No," she said. "I'm not married." "Dad's not married either," Emma said, with a tone so deliberately casual it was almost a parody of casualness. "He's divorced. I have 2 bedrooms." "Emma." "I'm just providing context," Emma said. Camille looked at Nathan with an expression that was struggling very hard not to be openly entertained. "I apologize for my daughter," Nathan said. "Don't," Camille said. "She's giving me context." Emma looked between them with an expression of profound satisfaction. They fell into something over the next several weeks that Nathan, if pressed to name it, would have called a friendship and left it at that, because he didn't have good language for what it actually was. It wasn't romantic. That was too large a word, too presumptuous, too much like wanting something he didn't entirely trust himself to want. But it was something. It had a shape. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, they walked the same route at approximately the same time, not by arrangement exactly, but not by accident either. They'd figured out that their walk schedules overlapped and had, by mutual unspoken agreement, started walking together. They talked about small things mostly, the city's new development projects, which Camille had opinions about that were both informed and somewhat ruthless in their pragmatism. The book Nathan was reading, which was a history of the American railroad system that Emma kept calling boring and stealing off his nightstand anyway. The ongoing drama of whether Monty would ever respect the fence. Camille was not, Nathan discovered slowly, an easy person to know. This was not a criticism. She was sharp and direct, and she had a way of saying what she thought that didn't leave much room for softening, which Nathan found startling at first, and then clarifying in a way he hadn't expected. She had no patience for hedging. She didn't perform interest she didn't feel. She was generous in specific ways. She'd shown up at his door one Wednesday evening with 2 portions of the pasta she'd been experimenting with, said, "I made too much, tell me if it's overworked," and left before he could do much more than take the containers, and completely unavailable in others. There were things she didn't talk about. He noticed it in gaps. A former partner referenced once and never again. A phone call she took one morning that left her silent for nearly half a mile, her jaw set, her gaze somewhere past the tree line. A moment at the farmer's market, 3 weeks into their walking routine, where she saw someone across the crowded rows of stalls, and her whole body changed. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have caught, but Nathan was standing right there, and he caught the way her hand tightened slightly on the canvas bag, and the way she angled her body without turning her back completely, and the way it took her a full 2 minutes to return to the easy quality of being present that she usually wore like it was nothing. He didn't ask. He understood, in his gut, that some information needed to arrive on its own schedule. Emma, predictably, was not patient with schedules. By mid-November, Emma had established a pattern of appearing on Camille's porch on weekend afternoons with questions, sometimes about business, sometimes about Monty, sometimes apparently about nothing at all, just company. Camille had not discouraged this. She'd started keeping a box of the kind of fruit snacks Emma liked in a kitchen drawer, which she would have died before calling what it was. "You're bribing my daughter," Nathan said one Saturday, after Emma had come home with fruit snacks and an extremely detailed account of the project Camille was currently managing. "I'm providing context for the real-world applications of what she's reading," Camille said, "with fruit snacks. The fruit snacks are incidental." Nathan looked at her. She looked back. Something in the air between them had the texture of something that neither of them was ready to name, and they had both gotten skilled at not naming it. "She likes you," Nathan said. "I like her," Camille said, simply. And there was nothing complicated in the way she said it, just the plain truth of it. And that was somehow the most disarming thing she'd said in weeks. It was a Thursday in late November when Nathan found out about Trevor. He hadn't asked. He needed to be clear about that, at least to himself. He hadn't pushed, or prompted, or done the thing he sometimes felt the urge to do when the gaps in what Camille shared became too noticeable. He'd been patient. They were on their morning walk and she'd taken a phone call. She sometimes did quick things, a few minutes, and this one went longer. He'd slowed his pace to give her room. He hadn't been listening. Then she was beside him again, and she was quiet, and she didn't do anything as obvious as look upset, but the quality of her silence had changed. They walked another block. "That was my attorney," she said. Nathan waited. "There's a man, Trevor Hale. We were engaged 18 months ago. I ended it." She said this in the same tone she used for project updates, factual and forward-facing. "He's been contesting a business arrangement we had. Our companies were in a joint venture. I bought him out. He's arguing the valuation was unfair." "Was it?" "No." She said it without any hesitation. "It was assessed by 2 independent firms. He knows the case has no merit. He knows it." A pause. "He's not doing it because he thinks he'll win." "Then why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because every time his attorneys file something, I have to respond. Every time there's a new motion, I have to spend time on it, spend money on it, look at his name, hear about him." She exhaled. "He knows how to make himself hard to leave behind." Nathan didn't say anything immediately. There were a handful of things he could have said, most of them useless. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's an exhausting way to be treated." She glanced at him. "Most people say something about legal strategy." "Do you want legal strategy?" "God, no. I have 3 attorneys for that." Something in her shoulders shifted, fractionally. It's exhausting. That's the right word." "It is." They turned onto the long block that brought them back toward Mercer Lane. The morning was cold, and the light was flat and gray, and neither of them said anything else for a while. And Nathan thought about what it would take to be that precise kind of tireless, to keep fighting on every front at once, to run a company and manage a legal battle and move to a new city and still show up at the farmer's market every Saturday and buy too many heirloom tomatoes and make pasta from scratch on Tuesday nights. He thought about what kind of person kept doing that without asking for help. The stubborn kind. The kind that had learned at some point that asking didn't always lead anywhere useful. "For what it's worth," he said when they turned onto Mercer Lane, "you seem like someone who wins these things." "I do," she said, without any false modesty. "That's not what keeps me up at night." "What does?" She looked at the house across the street, his house, for a moment, and then at her own, and then at nothing in particular. "That I'm still thinking about it," she said. "That's what keeps me up. That he still takes up that much space." Nathan understood this in his body before he understood it in his head. The space a person keeps taking up after they're supposed to be gone. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was too honest for either of them to hold on to for long, and they both let it go. "Coffee?" she said. "Yeah," he said. They walked up her porch steps, and Monty lost his mind on the other side of the door. and the morning settled back into something that had a shape they both recognized. And Nathan sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and watched her stand at the counter and explain the architectural problem with the Durham building site that was giving her trouble. And he thought that he could not remember the last time he'd sat in someone's kitchen in the morning light and felt like the world had contracted to a size that was actually manageable. He didn't do anything with that thought. He finished his coffee, said thanks, walked back across the street, and sat down at his laptop. Outside the window, the street was quiet. The Hennessy house, Camille's house, sat there the way it always had, except that now there was a light on in the kitchen and Monty was visible through the front window, sitting in the armchair Camille had specifically told him not to sit in. Nathan opened his documentation file. He stared at it for a while. He typed something. He deleted it. He typed it again. He left it. Shab. Emma told him, 3 days later, that she thought Camille seemed lonely. They were at dinner. Nathan had made chicken and rice, slightly underseasoned, the kind of meal that got the job done without distinction. And Emma had been quieter than usual, which always meant something was processing. "What makes you say that?" Nathan said. Emma pushed her rice around. "She's alone a lot. She works a lot. Monty's there, but Monty's a dog." A pause. "She laughs different with us than she does on the phone." Nathan looked at his daughter. "You notice that stuff." "I notice everything," Emma said, with complete matter-of-factness. "You know that." He did know that. "She's just busy," he said. "Some people are built for that." Emma gave him the look that communicated she found this explanation insufficient and was too polite to say so directly, except that she was 9 and had not fully developed the too polite muscle yet. "Dad," she said. "Emma, I'm just saying she could eat dinner with us sometimes. We can't just invite—" "Why not?" He couldn't come up with a reason that would survive Emma's scrutiny, which meant he didn't have a good one. "I'll think about it," he said. Emma went back to her rice with the expression of someone who had already won and was being gracious about it. Outside, across the dark street, Camille's kitchen light was on, and Nathan ate his underseasoned chicken and thought about all the ways a person could be brave in their professional life and cowardly in every other one. He included himself in that observation. He ate his dinner, he did the dishes. He thought about knocking on her door and inviting her to eat with them on Friday. He didn't that night. But he thought about it for a long time after Emma went to sleep, sitting in the quiet kitchen on Mercer Lane with the lights down and the street outside the window empty and still. And he thought about what she'd said, that some people kept taking up space after they were supposed to be gone. And he thought about the empty rooms in himself that he'd gotten so practiced at not entering that he'd started to believe they didn't exist anymore. They did. He knew they did. He just hadn't quite figured out what to do about that yet. He did invite her to Friday dinner. He almost didn't, and then he did. And he spent the 20 minutes between knocking on her door and her arrival rearranging the same 3 items on the kitchen counter for no reason. He'd knocked on her door Thursday evening, which was its own small act of courage that he didn't fully acknowledge to himself at the time. He'd told himself he was just being neighborly, that Emma had essentially requested it, that it was a practical, friendly, low-stakes thing to do, and that he was 43 years old and had survived a marriage and a divorce, and 3 years of rebuilding, and he was not going to stand on a neighbor's porch second-guessing a dinner invitation like a teenager. Camille had come to the door in reading glasses, which for some reason he hadn't expected, and she'd looked at him with the question in her face before he'd said anything. "Emma wanted to know if you'd come to dinner tomorrow," he said. "Nothing formal. I cook on Fridays." Emma wanted to know, she said, in a tone that made it clear she'd filed the attribution carefully. "I also wanted to know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "What time?" 6:30. "I'll bring something." "You don't have to. I'm not showing up empty-handed, Holloway. What do you need?" He thought about it. "We're low on good bread." "I can do that," she said. She'd shown up at 6:28 with sourdough from the bakery 2 miles away that he hadn't known she'd found yet, and a bottle of sparkling water and a small wrapped thing for Emma that turned out to be a field guide to marine biology, which Emma received with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy that made something ache in Nathan's chest in a way he couldn't have explained. "I remembered she mentioned marine biology," Camille said, in the casual tone of someone who had not in fact made a special trip. Emma looked at her father with an expression that said, "See, this is what I was talking about." Dinner had been imperfect in the specific ways that real dinners are imperfect. Nathan had overseasoned the pasta to correct last week's underseasoning and landed somewhere in between. Emma had talked for nearly 11 straight minutes about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea fish and their relationship to pressure and darkness, which Nathan had nodded along to and Camille had engaged with directly, asking actual follow-up questions that weren't just parental performance. Monty had scratched at the front door from across the street for the first 20 minutes until Camille had gone over to let him in, and he'd spent the rest of the meal under the table investigating everyone's shoes. It wasn't elegant. It was loud and slightly disorganized, and Emma spilled her water and Nathan ran out of paper towels and had to use the dishcloth, which he knew was wrong, but did anyway. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, between the pasta and the bread and Emma's fish facts, Camille had laughed, genuinely from somewhere real, and Nathan had looked up from his plate and thought quietly, "The way you think things you're not quite ready to say out loud. There it is." Whatever it was. He hadn't tried to name it that night. He'd said goodnight at the door, watched her cross the street with Monty lunging ahead of her on the leash, gone back inside and done the dishes while Emma read her new book at the kitchen table, and he'd been okay with not naming it. Some things needed a little more time before they could survive being identified. December arrived on a Tuesday and brought with it cold that had teeth, the kind that made the morning walks genuinely unpleasant for about 10 days until both Nathan and Camille adapted their layers and pace and the walks resumed their normal shape. Emma's school had a winter performance coming, which meant 3 weeks of a song Nathan could hear her practicing through her bedroom wall at night, slightly off-key and completely committed, and he loved her for both things. The weeks had a texture now that was different from what they'd had before October. He noticed it in small ways. The way Tuesday mornings felt purposeful rather than just operational. The way he'd started cooking with slightly more attention, not because anyone was coming over necessarily, but because the possibility existed. The way Emma had taken to leaving notes on the kitchen table, not for her father, but clearly in a format she'd designed in case someone else might read them. Things like, "Monty knocked over the recycle bin yesterday, and Camille was really mad, but also laughing." Or, "I asked C what her worst business failure was, and she told me about a project in Baltimore that lost a lot of money, and she said she still wakes up thinking about it sometimes." C. Emma had taken to writing her name as C, the way you abbreviate someone you've known long enough to shorten. "You're keeping notes on her," Nathan said one evening, looking at the latest one. "I'm keeping notes on everything," Emma said. "I'm a future businesswoman or marine biologist. I need data." "That's not what data means." "It's kind of what data means." He put the note down. He didn't throw it away. The three of them went to the farmer's market the second Saturday of December, which was not planned. Emma had asked, and Camille had been outside with Monty, and the two of them had effectively decided before Nathan was fully consulted. He'd caught up to them at the end of the driveway with his coffee still in his hand. It was cold enough that their breath was visible, and Monty was wearing a small knitted thing around his torso that Camille claimed was practical and Emma claimed was the greatest thing she'd ever seen. "It has a pocket," Emma said, for the third time. "It's functional," Camille said. "It has a pocket on a dog." "For his leash clip. It keeps—" "Emma, it's a leash clip holder. It's not—" "I want one," Emma said. "For my backpack, with a pocket on it." "Your backpack is a pocket," Nathan said. Emma ignored this. The market was smaller than it would be in summer, most of the seasonal produce vendors gone. But the bakery stall was there, and the cheese vendor and the woman who made honey from her own hives, and always seemed slightly disappointed that more people didn't understand the complexity of what she was offering. Camille bought honey without needing to be persuaded, which earned her a lengthy explanation of the difference between clover and wildflower and buckwheat that she appeared to genuinely listen to rather than wait through. Nathan bought coffee from a stall in the middle of the market and stood with it, watching Emma try to convince Camille to buy a hat from a vendor who made them from recycled wool. Camille was examining the hat with the same focused expression she presumably brought to architectural plans. Emma was narrating the hat's virtues in a voice that suggested she had a commission in this. "Does it have a pocket?" Camille said. Emma's face broke into a grin so wide it was almost structural. "I will buy every hat in this market if they have pockets," Camille said. Nathan stood there drinking his coffee in the cold and thought about the last time he'd stood somewhere and felt this close to content without it feeling borrowed or temporary. He couldn't place an exact date. That was interesting. They were on the way back to the car, Emma ahead with Monty, when he saw it. The moment he'd registered once before and now recognized again. Camille's pace changed, just fractionally, not enough that Emma would catch it. Her eyes tracked something at the far end of the market and her jaw did the thing it did, the small controlled setting. Nathan followed her line of sight and saw a man, maybe mid-40s, in an expensive coat, standing near the exit path. He wasn't looking at them, or he was looking at the cheese stall. It was ambiguous in a way that felt deliberate. Nathan looked back at Camille. "Keep walking," she said, low, even, and he did. They passed the far end of the market. The man didn't approach. Emma hadn't noticed. By the time they reached the car, Camille's stride had returned to normal, her expression recalibrated to something that looked functional. "That was him," Nathan said when Emma was ahead settling Monty into the back seat. Camille didn't answer immediately. Probably. "He does this," she said, with a flatness that was heavier than anger. "Shows up adjacent, close enough to register, far enough that there's nothing actionable." She opened the passenger door. "It's fine." "It's not fine," Nathan said. She looked at him over the roof of the car with an expression that wasn't arguing exactly, but wasn't agreeing either. "I know," she said. "I know it's not, but it's familiar enough by now that I know how to be around it." That statement, the idea that someone had gotten familiar enough with a specific kind of harassment that they'd developed fluency in it, sat badly with Nathan for the rest of the day in a way he didn't have good language to express. He thought about saying more. He decided that Camille didn't need his reaction to her situation on top of the situation itself, and that what she probably needed was for things to proceed normally. So he drove them back to Mercer Lane, and they had coffee at her kitchen table, and Emma read her marine biology book in the armchair Monty had colonized, and Nathan and Camille talked about the Durham project, which had gotten its approvals, and the man at the market was not mentioned again. But Nathan remembered his face. Expensive coat. Easy posture of someone accustomed to moving through spaces as though they owned them. And the deliberate ambiguity, close enough, far enough, that Camille had named with the specificity of someone who'd been learning the patterns for longer than anyone should have to. He remembered the face. It was in the first week of December that Nathan told Camille about Julia, and it happened without planning, the way the real things usually did. They were on the Wednesday walk, which had become its own thing, separate from the Tuesday-Thursday routine, because they'd both happened to be out on a Wednesday 2 weeks earlier and had fallen into step without discussion, and now it was apparently a Wednesday thing too. Nathan had registered this development without commenting on it. Camille appeared to operate on the same policy. He'd been talking about Emma's winter performance, the date, the fact that Emma had informed him the show had a dramatic plot this year, the fact that he'd been briefed on the dramatic plot in significant detail by Emma herself, but had been instructed to act surprised, and then somehow, in the sidewalk logic of conversations that move through small things to larger ones, he'd said, "Julia's coming up for it, Emma's mom." "How is that?" Camille said. "Fine," he said. "It's fine. We're functional at this point. We're both better parents separately than we were together. I think. That's not a criticism of her. It's just what's true." "That takes a while to get to," Camille said. It did. He watched a squirrel dispute something with another squirrel in the oak tree above them. "She remarried last spring. Nice guy. Emma likes him well enough, which was the important thing." He said this in a tone that was flat by design, the tone of something he'd said enough times that the raw edges had been worn smooth. Camille was quiet for half a block. "Do you mean that?" she said. "Or is that the version you've practiced?" Nathan looked at her. She was looking at the sidewalk ahead, not at him, which he recognized as her way of giving him room. "Both," he said after a moment. "I mean it and I practiced it." He thought about it. "I spent a long time being angry at her and an equal amount of time being angry at myself, And then I got tired of both and landed on, she made a decision that was right for her and painful for me. And those can both be true at the same time. They can, Camille said. I don't always feel it like that, he said. Sometimes I still feel the other version. The one where I went over every conversation in the last year of the marriage, trying to find the exact moment where I could have done something different. He paused. You know that exercise? I know that exercise, she said quietly, and something in her tone told him she knew it the way you know something you've worn out. It doesn't go anywhere. No, she agreed. It doesn't. They walked. The cold was steady, and the sky was the particular pale gray of December mornings that Nathan had come to associate with this walk, this block, this specific arrangement of his life. Emma was the thing that got me through the first year, he said. Not in a burden way, more like she needed me to keep being functional, and that was the most useful thing in the world to have at the time. Something that needed you. Most useful thing, Camille repeated. Don't misread that. It's not like I was hanging by a thread. I was just... He looked for the right word. Adrift. A little. And she was an anchor. Kids are like that. I wouldn't know, Camille said. Flat fact, not complaint. But he caught the shape of it. Did you want them? He said. It was a forward question, and he knew it, and he would have pulled it back except that they were at a point in this friendship, or whatever it was, where retreating felt more dishonest than proceeding. She was quiet long enough that he thought he'd miscalculated. Yes, she said. I was pregnant, briefly, a few years ago. Different relationship. It didn't continue. Another flat fact. Another weight inside it that she was reporting rather than displaying. I don't know whether I missed the experience or the idea of the experience. I've never been able to settle that. Maybe both, he said. Maybe both, she agreed. They were coming back around toward Mercer Lane now. Nathan was thinking about what it cost her to say things like that in the steady tone she used, and whether it was strength or habit, and whether the difference between those two things mattered. You don't have to have all of that sorted out, he said. Which version it was. You're allowed to not know. She looked at him. There was something in her face that was not quite guarded and not quite open, held in the space between those two states, and he thought about what it would mean to be someone who had gotten so good at managing her own terrain that she no longer knew quite what to do when someone pointed out she didn't have to. I'm used to having things sorted, she said. I know. It's functional. It is, he said, right up until it isn't. She looked at him for another moment and then looked back at the street, and something in her shoulders dropped a fraction, so small he might have imagined it. Tell me about Emma's dramatic performance plot, she said. So he did. The Friday dinners became a standing thing somewhere between the second and third week of December, without any formal declaration, the way real patterns establish themselves, not through decision but through repetition until the absence would be more notable than the presence. Camille brought things, never the same thing twice. Bread one week, a salad she'd clearly spent time on the next, a dessert the week after that, a chocolate thing with sea salt on top that Emma declared the greatest achievement of human civilization, and Camille received this compliment with a dignity that was only slightly undercut by how obviously pleased she was. She'd also started showing up some Tuesday evenings, not for dinner, just there. She and Emma had developed a Tuesday homework routine that Nathan had not been consulted on and had been informed of after the fact. Emma had a history project and had decided Camille was a useful resource, and Camille had apparently said yes before thinking too hard about it. You realize you've been voluntarily helping a 9-year-old with homework, Nathan said one Tuesday, after Emma had been put to bed and Camille was putting on her coat in his entryway. She had questions about the industrial economy, Camille said. I had answers. She has a textbook. Textbooks are fine. Real information is better. She zipped her coat. She's going to be very good at something when she grows up. She has that quality. Yeah, Nathan said. I know. Camille looked at him. You're doing that right for what it's worth. She's sure of herself without being difficult. That's not automatic. It landed somewhere he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure what to do with it, so he just said, thanks, and it came out quieter than he'd planned. She looked at him for a moment longer than usual, And then she said goodnight and opened the door, and he stood in the entryway after the door closed and looked at the middle distance for a while. He was aware that he was in the middle of something. He was not moving toward it quickly. He was not moving away from it. He was just in it, the way you're in weather, and he thought that was probably the honest version of where he was, and that honesty, at minimum, was something he could hold on to. Christmas Eve was Julia's, per the custody arrangement, and Emma left on the 23rd in a state of excitement that was partly about the holiday, and partly about seeing her mother, and partly about the elaborate gift she'd constructed for her dad that she'd been very bad at hiding for 2 weeks. Nathan drove her to the train station and watched her board with her too large backpack and waved at the window until the train moved and then sat in the parking lot for a few minutes doing nothing in particular. The house was quiet when he got home. He'd known it would be, and he was fine with it. He'd done solo Christmas Eves before. He had a plan. Decent bottle of whiskey, a movie he'd been meaning to watch, ordered food because he wasn't going to cook for one person on Christmas Eve. He was heating up said ordered food at 6 o'clock when he heard his front door, which he'd left unlocked out of habit, open, and Camille came in with Monty and a bag that smelled like garlic and warm bread. "I made too much pasta again," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Monty sniffed the delivered food with professional thoroughness. "You made exactly enough pasta," Nathan said. She set the bag on the counter. "Emma's at her mother's?" "Train left this afternoon." "I know, she texted me." She said this like it was normal that Emma texted her, because by now it was. "I didn't want you eating cold delivery food alone on Christmas Eve." Nathan looked at the delivery container, then at Camille, then at the pasta bag. "I would like some pasta," he said. Obviously. They ate at the kitchen table with the radio going low, some mix of December songs that the station played on a loop this time of year, and it wasn't a planned evening and there was nothing decorated about it. And Monty eventually got his nose into the bread bag, and they had to negotiate with him for the last roll, but it was something. It was a real evening, the kind that felt like something rather than the passage of time. She stayed until almost 10. They talked about her family. A sister in D.C. she was close to, a mother in Charlottesville she had a complicated relationship with, a father she described in short sentences with long spaces between them that suggested she'd done a lot of work on that topic and still hadn't fully finished. He talked about his parents, who were in Florida now and called every Sunday in a way that was loving but slightly removed. The particular distance of people whose children had lives they weren't fully inside anymore. "Were they good?" she said. "Your parents?" "Yeah," he said. "They are solid people." He thought about it. Maybe too solid. Like, they never showed me what to do when something actually breaks. Everything in our house growing up just worked. I didn't learn much about repairing things. Camille held her wine glass and looked at the table. "Mine showed me too much about breaking and not enough about building," she said. "So I taught myself the building part, which works until you realize you don't fully trust what you've built because you're the only one who knows the specs." Nathan looked at her. "That's a very exact thing to say." "I've had a while to develop the exact phrasing." He turned his wine glass slightly in his hands. "Do you trust what you've built?" "Sterling Group." "Completely," she said. "Immediate. The company I trust without question." He heard what she wasn't saying. She heard herself not saying it. "It's late," she said, and stood and started collecting her things with a kind of careful efficiency, and Monty woke up from under the table and stretched dramatically, as though he'd done all the work this evening. Nathan walked her to the door. "Thanks for the pasta," he said. "Thanks for the company," she said, and it was simpler than most of what they said to each other and landed harder for that reason. She went across the dark street. He watched the light in her house go on. He stood at his door for a minute in the cold with his hand on the frame, and he thought about all the versions of this moment he could have made different, and all the reasons he hadn't, and whether those reasons were wisdom or just the particular cowardice that looks like patience. He wasn't sure. He went inside. He did not sleep quickly. The new year arrived, and the legal pressure from Trevor Hale arrived with it. Camille had mentioned, in passing, that there was a new filing in January, something about equity distribution in the original joint venture, a fresh angle her attorneys were preparing a response to. She mentioned it the way she mentioned most things involving Trevor, flatly, briefly, and with a kind of controlled quality that was the opposite of calm, even when it looked like calm. But Nathan noticed that she'd been on her phone more in the mornings during their walks, that the quality of her silences had shifted from their normal contemplative to something that had an edge underneath, that she'd canceled one of the Friday dinners, first time since they'd started, with a text that said, "Long week, not good company, rain check," and he'd sent back, "Okay, no explanation needed," and meant it, and then spent the evening not quite present for the movie he'd picked. He texted her the next day. Not about anything important, just, "Monty was sitting in your chair again. I can see him from the kitchen window." She sent back, "I've accepted it. The chair is his now." And then, "Thanks for last night, for not making it a thing." He sent, "You don't have to be good company to eat pasta." A long pause. Then, "I'll remember that." He put his phone down and went back to his work, and thought about a woman across the street who had built everything around herself with skill and intelligence, and the particular stubbornness of someone who'd learned that needing people was complicated and had found it simpler, for a long time, to need as little as possible. He recognized that. He recognized it the way you recognize something you used to be. In February, Nathan ran into Marcus Delaney, who lived 4 houses down and had the approximate quality of everyone's favorite uncle, at the hardware store. Marcus was 62 and had lived on Mercer Lane for 20 years and had an opinion about everything in the most constructive possible way. He and Nathan had the relationship of men who waved at each other most mornings and talked occasionally when the opportunity presented. "Your neighbor," Marcus said in the cereal aisle tone of someone who was going somewhere with this. "Which one?" "Across the street, Sterling." "What about her?" "Nothing bad," Marcus said. "Just noticed she's been spending a lot of time at your place." He said it without inflection that Nathan could identify as anything other than genuine curiosity. "We're friends," Nathan said. Marcus looked at the shelf. "She seems like a serious person." "She is." "Emma likes her." "Emma has opinions about everything." "Emma," Marcus said, "is 9 years old and has better instincts than most adults I know." He picked up something from the shelf and put it back. "I'm not saying anything, Holloway. Just making an observation." "You made several observations." "I did," Marcus agreed, and moved his cart along without any further ceremony. Nathan bought what he came for and drove home, and did not think about Marcus Delaney's observations for the rest of the afternoon, mostly. That evening, Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, and Nathan was making dinner when Emma said, without looking up from her worksheet, "Do you like Camille?" Nathan stirred the pan. "Yes, I like her. She's my friend." "That's not what I'm asking." "Emma." She looked up. She was 9 3/4, and she had her mother's eyes, and she was looking at him with the patience of a scientist who has run the experiment enough times to already know the results and is waiting for the subject to catch up. "You should tell her," Emma said. "Tell her what, exactly?" "That you like her." She said this with complete seriousness. Before she has to wonder. Wondering is worse. Nathan looked at his daughter for a moment. "Where did you get that?" "The book about business strategy," Emma said, returning to her worksheet. Chapter 7. You have to be direct with people or they fill in the blanks themselves, usually wrong. That's about business strategy. "It's about everything," Emma said. Nathan turned back to the pan. The food needed attention. The kitchen was warm. Across the street, the lights in Camille's house were on, the shadow of Monty visible in the front window, and Emma was right that wondering was worse, and Nathan knew that, and he knew that he was standing in his kitchen being gently schooled by a 9-year-old on something that he was probably going to have to do something about before much longer. He wasn't ready yet, but he was closer than he'd been in October, standing at his kitchen window watching a moving truck and trying to convince himself he was working. He stirred the food. He thought about Chapter 7. He plated the dinner and called Emma to the table and told her to put the worksheet away, and she said 1 more minute, and he said now. And she folded it carefully, and they ate together in the warm kitchen on Mercer Lane. And it was an ordinary evening, and Nathan thought that ordinary, when it was the right kind of ordinary, was maybe what everything had been pointing toward all along. He did not act on Chapter 7 immediately. This is the honest version. He thought about it. He turned it over during the morning walks, considered it during the documentation work that had gotten markedly easier since October, revisited it on Friday evenings when the dinner conversation ran long and the kitchen stayed warm and he could see Emma watching them both with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis was being confirmed in real time. He thought about what he would say and how it would land and what happened if it landed badly, and then he thought about all of that a little too much. And then February became March, and the street thawed, and the oak trees started doing what oak trees did, and Nathan Holloway was still standing in the same place he'd been standing, just with better weather around him. The Trevor situation was getting worse. That was the more accurate thing to be paying attention to in March. And Nathan knew it, and Camille knew it, and there was a specific quality to the month that had something brittle underneath its surface. The new filing had not resolved. It had, in fact, expanded. Camille's attorneys had responded to the equity challenge in January, and Trevor's team had come back in February with something that widened the scope, language about the original formation documents of the joint venture, a claim that Camille had misrepresented the company's value at the time of the buyout, which her attorneys called meritless, and which still required a full response, which still cost money and hours, and the specific psychic energy of having to keep defending the same territory from a person who had decided that her time was less valuable than his persistence. She told Nathan about it on a Tuesday morning walk in the second week of March, in the way she always told him things like this, factually, sequentially, with the feeling pressed down into the middle of the factual part where she must have thought it wasn't visible. It was visible. "They want depositions now," she said. "My attorneys, 3 former employees, my CFO, he knows that's disruptive. That's the calculation." She had her hands in her coat pockets and she was looking at the sidewalk ahead. "David, my lead attorney, says we should be able to get it dismissed before it gets that far. Probably. He says probably." "Probably is a hard word," Nathan said. "It is." She exhaled. The air was still cold enough to see it. "The worst part is I've been here before. Different version, same mechanics. He used to do this in the relationship. Make a reasonable request that was actually just a way to consume resources, time, attention, energy. Dress it as something legitimate so that any objection looks like overreaction." Nathan thought about that. "And when you objected?" "Then I was difficult," she said, with a flatness that had the specific weight of something she'd been told enough times to still hear it, even if she didn't believe it anymore. Too aggressive, too reactive. Couldn't take criticism. He had a full vocabulary for it. She said it as statement of record, not as complaint, and that was somehow the harder version to hear. Nathan had known enough people who'd been through various degrees of that particular machinery to understand that the thing it took longest to fix wasn't the anger or the hurt. It was the way it got inside your judgment. The way you started checking your own responses against someone else's definitions of what was too much. "You know that was engineered, right?" he said. That vocabulary. "I know," she said. "Do you believe it?" A pause. Longer than most of hers. "Most of the time," she said. They walked the rest of the block without talking. When they reached the corner where they usually split to loop back, Camille stopped and stood looking at the intersection with an expression that was not quite anything Nathan had a name for. Not sad, not angry. Somewhere between exhausted and determined, 2 things that can look almost identical from the right angle. "I'm going to beat this," she said. Not to him, not exactly. Just out loud. The way you say something when you need to hear your own voice say it. "I know you are," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Don't just say that." "I'm not just saying it. You have 3 attorneys, a documented record, 2 independent valuations, and the kind of temperament that does not lose to someone who's operating on spite and a fear of being left behind." He said this in the straightforward manner of someone reporting what he actually believed. That's not reassurance. That's assessment. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're good at that," she said. "At what?" "Saying the actual thing." "I've had to work at it," he said. She looked back at the intersection. Something in her face settled slightly. Not relief exactly, but the particular shift of a person who's been carrying weight alone long enough to forget there were other options, remembering briefly that there were. They looped back to Mercer Lane without saying much else. Emma had her school performance the second Friday of March, and both Julia and Camille attended, which was not a situation Nathan had engineered and which had the potential to be many kinds of awkward. Julia arrived with her husband, Greg, who was a structural engineer and a genuinely decent person in the specific way that made it hard for Nathan to find fault with him, which Nathan sometimes resented in a way he was not proud of and was working on. Julia was warm with Emma and cordial with Nathan in the manner of two people who had put in real work to get to functional and were maintaining that investment carefully. She saw Camille before the show started because Emma led her directly to where Camille was sitting with the specific social strategy of a 9-year-old who had decided this introduction was happening tonight. "Mom, this is Camille. She lives across the street. Camille, this is my mom, Julia." Two women looked at each other with the polite assessment of people who have been told about each other by a 9-year-old and are recalibrating for primary sources. "Emma talks about you constantly," Julia said. "She talks about you constantly too," Camille said. "She's very clear about who matters to her." It was the right thing to say, and it landed correctly, and Julia's expression shifted in a way that Nathan recognized as genuine. Greg shook Nathan's hand. The lights went down. Emma performed her part in the dramatic production, which involved a scene where she played a harbor master during a 19th century storm, complete with a hat that was approximately 3 times too large for her head, and delivered her lines with the focus of someone who intended to be taken seriously. She was taken seriously. Camille laughed at the hat. Julia laughed at the hat. Nathan had tears in the specific location behind his eyes that he managed not to do anything obvious with, and Greg pretended not to notice, which Nathan appreciated. Afterward, Emma demanded the full group go for ice cream, and because Emma was Emma, the full group went for ice cream. Nathan spent 45 minutes in a booth at the ice cream shop off Route 9, watching his ex-wife and his neighbor find a conversational footing with each other, while Emma consumed a chocolate sundae of genuinely alarming proportions and explained her marine biology versus business strategy career dilemma to Greg, who was apparently now a useful data point on professional satisfaction. It was not comfortable, exactly, but it was real. And real, Nathan had come to understand over the past several months, was worth more than comfortable. When they said goodnight in the parking lot, Julia hung back a moment while Greg helped Emma with her coat. "She's good," Julia said quietly. "Not question, just observation." "Yeah," Nathan said. Julia looked at him the way she sometimes still did, with something that was neither regret nor its opposite but was adjacent to both. "You seem different," she said, "in a good way." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "It's been a good few months." She nodded, and then Emma was there demanding to know if Camille was coming back to the street with them or going separately. And the moment closed, and they said goodnight properly, and Nathan drove home with Emma describing Greg's thoughts on structural engineering versus marine biology in the back seat. The neighborhood block party happened in mid-March, which was early for it, but Marcus Delaney had organized it, and Marcus Delaney had a theory that March was the best time because everyone was tired of winter and not yet indifferent to spring. He was not wrong. The turnout was good. Folding tables on the sidewalk in front of his house, extension cords running to a speaker that played a mix from the 70s and 80s, covered dishes carried over from 6 different kitchens in the immediate vicinity. Nathan came with a pasta salad that Emma had helped make to the degree that she'd supervised the salt measurement and declared it adequate. Camille came with Monty on a leash and a lemon cake she'd made the night before, which she brought through Nathan's kitchen first so Emma could assess it. "It's good," Emma reported, having assessed it. "She used real lemon." "Real lemon is the only kind," Camille said. "Dad uses the bottle sometimes." "I know," Camille said. "I've seen it in your fridge." Nathan accepted this judgment without comment. The party was the easy version of neighborly. People in a limited radius who mostly got along because proximity had made them practice it, plates of food, mild conversations about the street, and the city council's new parking initiative and who was getting their roof redone. Nathan talked to Marcus for a while, and to the couple 2 doors down who just found out they were having twins and looked simultaneously thrilled and terrified, which Nathan recognized as the correct emotional response. Camille moved through the gathering with more ease than he expected. She was good at this, he realized, good at the surface of social things, the competent pleasantness of someone who had spent years in rooms where she needed to hold the room. She talked to people. She asked questions that were real questions. She laughed at Marcus's story about the parking initiative, which was genuinely funny. But Nathan watched her, in between conversations of his own, and he could see the thing underneath. The way her eyes moved occasionally to the edge of the gathering and back. The way her attention was never fully settled. Trevor Hale wasn't there. Nathan was reasonably certain of that. But the habit of checking had gotten into her body in a way that didn't switch off just because the immediate occasion didn't warrant it. He was standing with Marcus and the twin couple when it happened. Trevor Hale walked up the sidewalk. Not from nowhere. There must have been a car parked at the end of the block, a walk down the sidewalk that anyone not watching for him would have read as a neighbor or a passerby. He was in a good coat, as always, and he moved with the ease of someone who considered his presence in any space a reasonable default. He wasn't invited. That was clear from the way Marcus frowned and the way several people turned to register an unfamiliar face at a neighbors-only gathering. He went directly to Camille. She saw him before he reached her. Nathan watched her see him, the way her chin came up and her expression locked into something controlled and still. She didn't move away. She held her ground. Monty, on the leash beside her, looked at Trevor with the mild, suspicious interest of a dog who hadn't decided yet. "Camille," Trevor said, his voice carried. Not so loud as to make a scene, but enough that people nearby turned. "I've been trying to reach you directly. Your attorneys are how you reach me," she said. Level. Quiet. "You know that. This has gone on long enough." He said it with a kind of reasonable-sounding fatigue that Nathan recognized as performance even from 15 feet away. "I don't want to be fighting. That was never Trevor." She said his name the way you say a word you're tired of saying. "Stop. I just want to talk, that's all. Reasonable conversation between two adults who what?" Something shifted in her voice. Not loudness, not losing it. Something harder and cleaner. "Two adults who built something together? You didn't build anything. You attached yourself to what I built and called it partnership. And when I finally got clear on the difference, you decided the legal system was a better tool for maintaining access than you'd managed personally." She said it without volume, without performance, just the plain shape of what was true. "So no, we're done with the reasonable conversation stage." Trevor's jaw did something. He looked around at the gathering, the watching faces, the folding tables, the speaker still running its 70s mix. His expression recalibrated towards something more aggrieved and public. "This is what she does," he said, shifting his address to the general vicinity. "She decides the narrative, and then—" Nathan moved. He wasn't sure, afterward, what exactly had decided it. It wasn't planned. He set down his plate on the nearest table and walked over and stood beside Camille, not in front of her, beside her, and looked at Trevor Hale. "I think you should go," Nathan said. Trevor looked at him, assessing. "Who are you?" "I live here," Nathan said. "This is a private gathering. Nobody invited you. This is a public sidewalk. The tables are on private property, and more to the point, the person you came here to talk at has told you how to reach her, and it's not this." Trevor looked between Nathan and Camille with an expression that was recalculating something, and then he looked at the gathered neighbors, several of whom had, it should be said, formed a loose proximity around Nathan and Camille that was not accidental. Marcus Delaney, who was 62 and had the build of someone who'd done physical work for 30 years before retiring, was standing about 4 feet away with his arms crossed and an expression of total neutrality that was somehow the least neutral expression Nathan had ever seen. "I'll hear from your attorneys," Trevor said to Camille. "You always do," she said. He left. He walked back up the sidewalk with the measured pace of someone who was choosing to leave rather than being made to, and turned at the end of the block, and that was the last any of them saw of him that evening. The party reconvened. Marcus reloaded his plate. The twin couple picked up the conversation they'd dropped. The speaker moved from the 70s into the 80s, and the food got eaten, and the March evening did what March evenings do when you let them. Nathan stayed where he was, beside Camille. Monty sat on his foot, which was either solidarity or coincidence. "Are you okay?" Nathan said. She was quiet for a moment. "Ask me in 20 minutes. "Okay." He stayed. 22 minutes later, she said, "What?" Yes, I'm okay. And then, thank you. I just stood there. That's what I needed, she said. Someone to just stand there. He thought about that for a while. Awesome. They sat on her porch afterward, after the party had wound down, and Emma had gone to bed and Monty was somewhere inside, probably on the chair. It was cold enough to need coats, and neither of them went inside, which said something about both of them. He's going to keep doing this, Camille said. She was looking at the street. Until the case resolves, he has a reason, and after, I don't know what he'll tell himself after. Some people need an enemy to organize their time. You're not his enemy, Nathan said. I know that. He doesn't. Nathan held his coffee, which had gone cold, and looked at the dark street. A car passed. The oak trees moved in the light wind. What did it look like? He asked. The relationship before you got out. She didn't answer immediately. He let it sit. Like being very busy, she said finally. That's the most honest description. He was always doing something, I was always managing something. There was always a next thing. And then one day I looked around and I realized every single thing we were managing was either something he'd started or something I'd started that he'd taken over. My company was the only space that was actually mine. She paused. I thought that was just how relationships were. Compromise and navigation and constant management of someone else's needs. Another pause. I watched my parents do it. Different version, same premise. Did he ever... Nathan stopped. He wasn't sure how to ask the next part. Not physically, she said. If that's what you're asking. She seemed to think about whether to continue. But there are other ways to make a person doubt their own read on things, and he was practiced at them. She looked at her hands. I got out. I know I got out. Some days the exit feels further away than it actually is. Nathan looked at her profile in the porch light. He thought about everything she'd built, the company and the competence and the careful management of what she let herself need, and he thought about what it had cost and what it still cost, and what she probably told herself those costs were worth. It's going to be further away for a while, he said. That's just the truth of it. And then one day it won't be. That's not particularly reassuring, she said. I know, he said, but I think you're tired of things that are reassuring when they're not actually true. She looked at him. You told me that once, he said. The we'll see thing, about Emma and the dog. You said don't do that. He met her eyes. So I'm not doing that. Something in her face shifted. Something that had been held carefully for a long time moved, just slightly, and Nathan felt the specific pull of a moment that wanted to become something else, and also understood that he wasn't quite ready, and neither was she, and that was, for now, okay. You remember everything I say, she said. Most of it, he said. She looked back at the street. Why? He thought about the honest answer. Because I pay attention to things that are real, he said. And you're real. She didn't say anything for a while after that, but she stayed on the porch, and he stayed on the porch, and the March wind moved through the oak trees on Mercer Lane, and neither of them was in a hurry to go inside. The filing resolved in April. Camille's attorneys got it dismissed. The equity challenge, the deposition demands, all of it. 2 weeks after the block party, Trevor Hale's legal team withdrew the core claim, apparently having done the math on how far the independent valuations made their case untenable and deciding the ongoing cost wasn't worth the diminishing results. David, her lead attorney, called it a clean win. Her CFO sent champagne. Her assistant sent a photo of the office celebrating. She told Nathan on a Wednesday morning walk, and she said it in the same tone she'd been using for all the updates, factual and controlled, and he listened to all of it and then said, "How does it feel?" She was quiet for a block. Like when you put down something heavy and your arms still feel like it's there, she said. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what it's like. Does it go away? The feeling of the weight? Yes, give it time. She nodded. He could see her turning this information over, filing it somewhere useful. He still has to sign formal withdrawal documents, she said. That's another 3 to 6 weeks. He'll take the full 6, but after that, it's done. Done, Nathan said. Done. They walked in silence for a moment that felt different from the other silences this walk had collected. Lighter. Not empty. lighter. Emma found out when she got home from school that afternoon because Camille had texted her, which Nathan discovered when Emma came into the kitchen with her phone and said, "The case got dismissed." Nathan looked up from his laptop. "She told you." "She tells me things," Emma said with dignity. "We have a system." She set her backpack on the chair. "She also said to tell you she's making the chocolate pasta thing for Friday." "There's no such thing as chocolate pasta." "She invented it. It's pasta and like a dark chocolate sauce thing. She made it once before when you weren't here." Emma got a glass from the cupboard. "It's really good. You'll like it." Nathan watched his daughter fill her glass from the tap with the comfort of someone in her own kitchen, and he thought about all the small calibrations of the past 6 months. The fruit snacks in the drawer, the field guide for Emma, the Tuesday homework sessions, the Wednesday walks, the Friday dinners, the Christmas Eve pasta, the porch conversations that went later than either of them planned. He thought about what those things added up to when you stood back and looked at them honestly. He thought about Chapter 7 sitting in Emma's notebook on her desk upstairs. He thought about what he'd said on the porch. "You're real." He thought about the way she'd stayed. "Emma," he said. She looked up from her water. "Do you want a dog?" he said. Emma stared at him. "I'm not saying this week," he said. "I'm saying we should talk about it seriously. If you want to do the research, figure out what kind, what it takes. I'm open." Emma put her water glass down very carefully. She looked at her father with the expression she reserved for moments of major significance. "Are you serious?" she said. "I'm serious." She launched herself at him from across the kitchen in the way she hadn't since she was 6, both arms around his neck, and he caught her and held on, laughing because her enthusiasm was structural and he had no other option. "Can it be a golden retriever?" she said into his shoulder. "Like Monty, but ours?" "We'll do the research." "That means yes." "It means we'll do the research." "Dad?" "Emma." "It means yes," she said, with the absolute certainty of someone who had just won something she'd been working on for a long time. He held on to her and thought that she was right, and that some things only look like they're being decided in the moment when they've actually been getting decided for months, in small installments, without any single one of them feeling like a commitment until you add them all up and see what you've been building. Outside, across the street, Camille's kitchen light was on. Monty was in the window. The oak trees were fully green now, all the gray of February gone, and the street had the quality of a place in its best season, the particular rightness of somewhere that had been ordinary long enough to become yours. Nathan let Emma go, finally, when she started listing potential dog names with the focus of someone who had been maintaining a secret list for approximately 2 years and was finally allowed to share it. He listened to the list. He looked out the window. He thought, soon. He didn't specify what he meant by that, even to himself, but it was a different kind of thought than the ones he'd been having since October. Less like a door he was standing in front of and more like one he'd already decided to open, just working up to the actual motion of his hand. Soon. He listened to Emma's list. He smiled. The 6 weeks it took Trevor Hale to sign the withdrawal documents were the longest 6 weeks of the spring, and they had a specific quality that Camille described to Nathan once as waiting for a tooth to finish falling out. "It's already done," she said. "The thing is decided. But you still have to go through the motion of it completing." He understood that. He'd spent enough time in the aftermath of his own marriage understanding that some endings don't happen in a single event. They happen in installments, each one smaller than the last, until one day you reach for the weight of it and find mostly air. Trevor signed on a Thursday afternoon in early May. Camille texted Nathan 2 words. "It's done." He was in the middle of a client call, and he looked at his phone under the desk like a teenager and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't fully registered as tightened. He texted back, "Come to dinner Friday. Bring nothing." A pause. Then, "I'll bring bread." He almost typed, "I said bring nothing." He typed instead, "Fine, bring the bread." Emma, when informed, treated this as the natural conclusion of events she had been monitoring for months. "Good," she said, with the equanimity of a general whose campaign has ended as projected. She went back to her dog research binder, which was now 17 pages long and organized by breed, temperament, and apartment suitability. The last category included despite them living in a house, because Emma was thorough. The Friday dinner that week was different from the others in a way that was hard to name precisely. Not louder or more celebratory, just looser, like something that had been pulled slightly taut for months had finally gone slack in a good way. Camille laughed more easily. Nathan caught himself watching her laugh and not doing anything to disguise it, which was its own kind of development. Emma noticed, filed it, and maintained a diplomatic silence that was frankly impressive for a 9-year-old. After dinner, after Emma was in bed, they sat on Nathan's back porch with the May air doing what May air does in Virginia. Warm at the surface, cool underneath, the kind of evening you want to stay inside of. "I haven't felt this particular way in a long time," Camille said. "What way?" "Like something is actually over." She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she'd made herself in his kitchen with the ease of someone who knew where everything was, because by May she did know where everything was. Not paused, not waiting for the next filing, actually over. "How's it feel?" She thought about it. Quiet. In a good way. Like when the noise stops and you don't realize until it stops how constant it's been. Nathan nodded. The backyard was dark at the edges, and the motion sensor light above the door made a warm circle around the porch. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. Not Monty. One of the dogs in the next block. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You don't usually ask," she said. "You usually just say it." "This one I'm asking." She looked at him. In the porch light, her expression was open in a way it wasn't always. The careful management dialed back slightly, the way she sometimes allowed it to be when the evening had gone long enough that the effort of holding everything in place felt like more work than it was worth. "Go ahead," she said. He set his mug down on the railing. "The box," he said. "The wedding stuff. Trevor's things. You mentioned it once, that you'd been carrying it around." She was quiet. "Do you still have it?" he said. "It's in my closet," she said, "on the top shelf. I've moved it 3 times in 2 years, and I've never opened it." "Why not?" "Because I've been afraid of what I'd feel," she said. "Whether it would be grief or relief or nothing, and I don't know which of those would be worse." Nathan picked his mug back up. He looked at the dark backyard. "What if it's all 3?" he said. She considered this. "That might be the most honest outcome." "I think you should open it," he said. "Not alone." She looked at him. I'm not trying to insert myself into something that isn't my business," he said. "I just think you've been carrying that particular thing by yourself for long enough, and you don't have to." Camille was quiet for a long time. The May air moved through the yard. Somewhere in the house, Monty shifted on whatever piece of furniture he'd claimed tonight. "Not tonight," she said. "No," he agreed. "Not tonight." She looked at him with something that was not quite the expression she usually wore, something more undefended. "Soon, though," she said, almost like a question. "Whenever you're ready," he said. She looked at her tea. "Okay," she said. The dog question was formally resolved on a Saturday in mid-May, which happened to coincide with the opening of the city's spring adoption event at the community center 4 miles away. Emma had known about this event for 3 weeks. She had also somehow known that a rescue organization called Second Chance Retrievers was going to have a presence there. Nathan suspected advance intelligence from Camille, who had the specific quality of someone who had gotten Emma information while maintaining plausible deniability. "I just mentioned the event existed," Camille said, when Nathan gave her the look. She had a printed schedule. "She's organized." She had notes in the margin. "She's very organized." They went. All 3 of them, plus Monty, because the event was dog-friendly, and because Monty considered himself a required participant in all community activities. Emma walked ahead with the binder, which she had brought, and Monty tried to introduce himself to every dog they passed with an enthusiasm that made leash management a full-time position. Nathan watched Emma at the rescue tables, watched her ask the volunteers questions that were real questions, informed questions, the kind you ask when you've done 17 pages of preliminary research and have specific concerns about shedding and energy levels and compatibility with existing pets in the household. She was serious about it. The volunteers responded to her seriously, which she appreciated. There was a dog. Of course there was a dog. He was 14 months old, a golden retriever mix with one ear that stood up and one that folded over at the tip, in a way that appeared to be structural rather than situational. His name was Cooper, per the rescue's tag, though Emma immediately said that they could keep it or change it. She had a list, and Cooper appeared indifferent to the question of his own name as long as someone was touching his ears. Emma looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Cooper. Cooper put his chin on Nathan's knee. "Okay," Nathan said. Emma made a sound that was not quite a word. Camille stood slightly behind them both, smiling at something in a way she thought no one was watching, and Monty pressed his nose into Cooper's face with the hospitality of a dog who assumed everyone would be glad to meet him. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Emma did most of it, or tried to, until the volunteer gently clarified that the adult was required to sign. Nathan signed. Emma supervised. They drove home with Cooper in the back seat next to Emma, who had one hand on him at all times and was narrating information about the neighborhood to a dog who was visibly trying to lick her ear. In the front seat, Camille was looking out the window with the quiet expression she had when something had landed well, and she was taking a moment to just let it. "You knew about the retriever rescue," Nathan said. "Emma mentioned it," she said. "Emma mentioned it because you mentioned the event." "That's a lot of indirect causation." "You planned this," he said. She looked over at him. The smile she was managing was losing the fight with her face. "I provided information," she said. "The dog made his own choices." Nathan looked at the road. "Thank you," he said. She looked back out the window. "Don't thank me. He's going to eat your furniture." "I know." "And your documentation files." "I know." "You're going to love every minute of it," she said. "I know," he said, sad. The box came out on a Sunday afternoon in late May, 3 weeks after Trevor signed the papers. Nathan had not brought it up again after the porch conversation. He'd let it sit. He trusted that Camille knew where she was with it and that she'd say when she was ready, and she had. A text on Saturday evening that said, "Tomorrow afternoon, if you're free," just a couple hours. He was free. He came across the street at 2 in the afternoon to find Camille's kitchen unusually clean, in the way of someone who had organized something external while preparing for something internal. She had coffee going, and Monty was in his chair, and there was a box on the coffee table in the living room that was the specific beige of storage boxes, sealed with packing tape that had been cut once, recently. She was standing near the window when he came in, not looking at the box. He didn't make it a thing. He poured himself coffee and sat on the couch, and Camille sat in the chair that was technically Monty's, but that Monty had temporarily vacated in apparent recognition of the occasion. "I'm going to tell you something about the relationship before I open it," she said, "because once I open it, I don't want to be explaining things. I want to just get through it." "Okay," he said. "Trevor and I were together for 3 years before the engagement. The first year was good. Not perfect, but good. He was smart and he was driven and he had this quality of total attention when he was paying it, the kind that makes you feel very visible. And after the relationship before him, which was someone who barely noticed I was in the room, it was compelling." She held her mug with both hands. "The second year, the attention started to have conditions. It showed up when I was doing what he approved of and went away when I wasn't. I told myself it was communication style. Different people, different patterns." She paused. "Year 3, he suggested merging our company's real estate holdings into a joint entity. I thought it was a genuine business proposal. I think it was also about control, having a structural claim on what I'd built that wasn't just personal." Nathan listened. He did not say anything. The engagement happened at the end of year 3, and by that point I had gotten very good at not trusting my own read on things. He'd trained me to check my instincts against his version. So when I felt something was wrong, I'd run it through his framework first, and it would come out as my overreaction, or my insecurity, or my difficulty with intimacy. She set her mug down. "It took my sister. She came to stay for a weekend, and she watched us for 2 days, and she said, in the car, on the way to the airport, 'Cam, I don't know how to say this gently, so I'm just going to say it. He talks to you like you're a junior employee he's not sure about.'" She looked at the box. She was right. I knew she was right. It took me 4 more months to actually leave, because knowing and leaving aren't the same thing. Nathan looked at her. 4 months isn't very long, he said, given everything you're describing. Some people take 4 years, she said. I know that. I've read the literature. A dry pause. But it felt long from inside it. Yeah, he said. It always does. She got up and picked up the box and sat back down and set it in her lap. The tape came off in 2 pieces. The flaps opened. She looked inside for a moment without moving. Then she started taking things out. A planner, the kind with a ribbon marker, in sage green. She opened it to a marked page, a seating chart, hand-drawn, very detailed, with annotations in 2 different pen colors. She looked at it for a moment and then set it aside. A folder of vendor confirmations. A photography consultation. A printed email chain about a venue deposit that had been lost when she'd canceled, and whether it was refundable, which, based on her expression, it had not been. A photograph. She looked at it for long enough that Nathan thought about saying something. She turned it face down instead. Engagement photos, she said. He insisted on them. I didn't want to do them, and then the photographer was so good that they came out well, and I thought that was a sign of something. She looked at the turned-over photo. I was looking for signs everywhere by that point. You do that when you don't trust your own judgment. You look for external confirmation. Nathan looked at his hands. I did that too, he said. After Julia. Looked for things that were signs I was going to be okay. Interpreted everything as either confirmation or warning. He paused. It's exhausting. It is, she said. There was more in the box, a bridal magazine with post-it tabs, a small velvet bag that she opened and looked into and then set down without taking anything out. Nathan didn't ask about the velvet bag. Some things you don't need to be told. Near the bottom, a piece of paper folded 3 times. She unfolded it. He watched her read it. Her face did several things, none of them large. She read it to the end and refolded it. It's a letter I wrote to myself, she said, when I was deciding to leave. My therapist had me do it. Just why you're making this choice. The actual reasons, not the practiced ones. She held it in her hand. I'd forgotten how clear I was in it. I was more clear than I thought I remembered being. What's in it? He said. She thought about it. That I wanted a life that felt like mine, she said. That the company had been the only thing for 3 years that actually felt like mine. That I wanted to find out what it felt like to have a life outside the company that was also mine. She looked at the folded paper. That I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own story. Nathan thought about that. And, he said, she looked at him. And what? Did you find it? What you were looking for when you wrote that? Camille sat with that question for a moment. She looked around the living room, the books on the half-organized shelf, the blue paint on the accent wall that she'd finally gotten around to in February, the dog asleep in the chair that was officially his now, the street through the window, the house across the street. I'm finding it, she said. I think that's the honest answer. Not found, finding. That's the right answer, he said. She looked at him directly. You're part of that, she said. You and Emma. I want to be clear about that. Nathan held her gaze. This was the moment where an earlier version of him would have deflected, said something modest or practical, moved the conversation sideways. He didn't do that. I know, he said. You're part of ours too. Something in her face went quiet in a different way. Not closed, the opposite of closed. She put everything back in the box. Not quickly, not anxiously, just neatly, one piece at a time. Then she closed the flaps and held the box in her lap. Can you throw this out? She said. I don't want to do it myself, but I'm not going to look at it again. Yeah, he said. He took the box. He put it by the door. He sat back down and they finished their coffee, and Monty woke up from his chair and came over and put his chin on Camille's knee in the way that Cooper had put his chin on Nathan's knee at the adoption event, and Camille looked at the dog for a moment and then looked at Nathan and said, How's Cooper settling in? He ate a charging cable this morning, Nathan said. That's his way of saying he's comfortable. He's extremely comfortable. Emma is devastated about the cable and also completely fine with all of it. That's how you know it's working, Camille said. She almost smiled. He let himself look at it. Bad. June arrived the way Virginia Junes do. Suddenly, with heat that felt like a decision. The street changed quality. The oak trees going full and dense, people out on porches in the evenings, the general loosening of a neighborhood when the year tips into its better half. Cooper had fully colonized the Holloway household within the first 2 weeks, in the specific way of a dog who has identified where the food, warmth, and maximum ear-scratching attention are located and has organized his life accordingly. He had an agreement with Emma that involved her throwing the ball in the backyard for no less than 20 minutes per afternoon. He had an agreement with Nathan that involved the couch, which Nathan had said no to and had lost. He had a relationship with Monty that involved a great deal of mutual sniffing and the occasional shared territorial defense of the yard fence line against a squirrel that lived in the oak tree and considered the yard a personal offense. Camille started coming over in the morning sometimes, just briefly, coffee before the workday. Not every day, not by schedule. Just when the morning had that particular ease and crossing the street felt like the natural next thing. Nathan noticed that on the morning she came over, the workday started better. He filed this as data and did not overthink it. He had been trying, in his careful, deliberate way, to be less afraid of what was obvious. He was not succeeding at a remarkable rate, but he was succeeding somewhat, which was progress. Emma had noticed the mornings. "She comes over a lot," Emma said one Tuesday, in the tone of someone providing a neutral observation that was not remotely neutral. "She's our neighbor," Nathan said. "She comes over to see you." "She comes over when I'm at school," Emma said. Nathan drank his coffee. "Just an observation," Emma said, with the innocence of a person who had been working on this observation for a while and was deploying it at optimal timing. "Thank you," Nathan said. "Very helpful." "I'm a future businesswoman," Emma said. "Data matters." He thought about telling her to let him manage his own life. He thought about how that had been going for the past 9 months. He drank his coffee. The thing Nathan did not know about in June was the article. A regional business publication had been doing a profile of Camille for 3 months, timed to a major project announcement, a community development initiative in Richmond that Sterling Group was leading, involving low-income housing and workforce training facilities. The kind of project that was the work she'd told him about in her kitchen in October, the part she liked most and that made the least money. The article came out in the first week of June. It was substantial. 4 pages, photographs, a full account of the company's history, and Camille's particular philosophy about what development should be for. Nathan found out about it from Marcus Delaney, who had seen it and knocked on Nathan's door on a Thursday morning with a printed copy and the expression of a man delivering good news he expected credit for. "Your neighbor," Marcus said. Nathan took the printed pages. He read the article at the kitchen table with Cooper across his feet and the morning quiet around him. The article was good. It was accurate, from what he could tell. It had the quality of Camille's actual voice in the quoted sections, that specific combination of precision and plainness. It talked about the company's origins, the early years working from the one-bedroom apartment she'd mentioned once to Nathan in the context of something else. It talked about the Richmond project in the language she used when she was actually excited about something, which was not hyperbole, but a kind of focused specificity that felt more convincing than enthusiasm. There was a line near the end, in response to a question about what drove her, where she'd said, "I want to build things that are still useful in 30 years, not impressive." Useful. There's a difference, and most people in this industry have lost track of it. Nathan sat with that for a moment. He texted her, "Read the article." A pause. Camille. "Marcus printed it, didn't he?" Nathan. "He brought it to my door." Camille. "I've been trying to avoid reading it. I hate reading things about myself." Nathan. "Read it. It's good. You sound like yourself." A longer pause. Camille. "That might be the best thing you could say about it." He put his phone down. He thought about the woman who had walked out of the house across the street 9 months ago with a clipboard and an expression that was deciding something. He thought about the gaps in her conversation and the cost of what she'd built, and the box she'd needed someone to sit beside her while she opened, and the way she stood at the block party when Trevor arrived, chin up, holding her ground. He thought about the morning coffees and the Friday dinners and the Tuesday homework sessions and Emma's 17-page dog research binder and the Christmas Eve pasta and the March porch and the way she'd said, "You're part of that." He thought, soon is closer than it's ever been. He picked up his phone again. He put it down. He picked it up. He called Emma's school, verified she was getting picked up at the normal time, confirmed she had her house key. Then he did something that took approximately 45 minutes of preparation and 3 false starts. He walked across the street. Camille came to the door in work clothes. A meeting had run long, he could tell by her expression, the tail end of something professional still in her posture. She looked at him. He was standing on her porch on a Thursday morning with no particular stated reason. "Is everything okay?" she said. "Yes," he said. I want to say something, and I've been constructing the approach for approximately 6 months, and I've decided the approach isn't the thing." She looked at him. "I have feelings for you," he said. "Clear, specific feelings that are not in the category of neighbor or friend. And I'm aware that's a complicated thing to introduce, and I'm aware you've just come through a year of difficult legal and personal things, and I'm not trying to add pressure. I'm tired of knowing something and not saying it. I told you I don't do the we'll see thing. I'm trying to be consistent about that." Camille stood in the doorway. She was quiet long enough that Nathan felt the specific discomfort of a person who has committed to a thing and is now waiting to find out what it costs. "I know," she said. He blinked. I know," she said. "I've known for a while. I just didn't know when you were going to get around to saying it." Something in her expression shifted into something that was not quite the collected version of herself, something a degree or two more unguarded. "I have the same feelings. If that wasn't clear." "It was somewhat clear," he said. "Somewhat," she said. "I was somewhat clear. You're usually very precise." "I was being cautious." She looked at him. "I'm not going into this fast. I want to be honest about that. I'm still calibrating in some places. There are things I've been working on fixing about how I operate in relationships, and I don't have that finished." "I'm not asking you to have it finished," he said. "I'm also not—" She paused. "I don't want you to have to wait for something, or wonder. That's not fair to you." "Camille," he said. "What?" "I've been standing across the street for 9 months," he said. "I'm not in a hurry." She looked at him with that direct quality she always had, the one that had made him feel seen and slightly unsteady from the first morning on the sidewalk when she'd called him the watcher and shook his hand with her actual grip. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She looked at the street behind him, at the oak trees in their full June coverage, at the 2 houses facing each other across the width of Mercer Lane. "Do you want to come in?" she said. "Yes," he said. She stepped back from the door. He went in. Nothing was resolved exactly. Nothing snapped into place with a finality that made the previous 9 months make sudden sense. They sat at her kitchen table and talked, the way they'd been talking for 9 months, except that now there was a different quality of acknowledgement in it, something that didn't need to be managed or navigated around, just present. Monty put his chin on Nathan's knee. Nathan scratched his ears. They sat in the June morning in Camille Sterling's kitchen on Mercer Lane, with the coffee going and the light coming through the windows and the dogs, Monty here and Cooper, presumably, across the street on the couch he wasn't supposed to be on, and nothing was neat about any of it. Nathan was still working through who he was after the marriage. Camille was still finishing the work of leaving someone who had taken longer to leave than the calendar said. Emma was 9 and opinionated and going to have questions. The world was not arranged for easy. It never had been. But Nathan sat in that kitchen and felt, with a clarity that he hadn't felt in a long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He didn't say that out loud. He didn't need to. Camille looked at him from across the table with the expression she had when she'd assessed something and arrived at a conclusion, and the conclusion was one she was prepared to stand behind. That was enough. For now, it was enough. Outside, the June street was full and green and the morning was going somewhere good. The thing about saying something out loud is that it doesn't fix everything. Nathan had known this going in, but there's a difference between knowing something and living inside it. And the weeks after that Thursday morning on Camille's porch were an education in the gap between those two states. What changed? They stopped navigating around it. The acknowledgement was there, named and real, and that was worth something. More than Nathan had expected, actually. The careful management of distance that had been part of the infrastructure of their friendship for 9 months dissolved, and what replaced it was something more honest and, in places, more uncomfortable. Because removing the buffer between two people who have been protecting each other from their own feelings means you're suddenly standing in the full weather of the thing, and full weather is not the same as the idea of full weather. What didn't change? Both of them were still, in specific and different ways, works in progress. Camille had said it on the porch, and she'd meant it. She was still calibrating. Nathan had taken that at face value because he'd meant what he'd said too. He wasn't in a hurry, and that was true. But it was also true that he had his own inventory of incomplete repairs, and that some of those repairs were things he'd been calling finished when they weren't quite. The marriage had left marks that he'd learned to stop seeing because you can only look at the same damage for so long before you start calling it the wall's natural texture. So June had a different quality than the months before it. Better in most ways. More honest in ways that were occasionally difficult. They were figuring out what this was in real time, which meant sometimes the timing was off, and sometimes someone said the right thing, and sometimes they didn't. And they were both people who had gotten skilled at being alone inside their own management and unskilled at being seen in the middle of uncertainty. Emma, for her part, received the development with the satisfaction of someone whose investment thesis had paid off, and then proceeded to be completely normal about it, which was the most useful thing she could have done. She didn't treat Camille differently. She didn't treat Nathan differently. She continued her homework Tuesday sessions and her fruit snack consumption and her ongoing negotiation with Cooper about the definition of personal space. What she did do, once, about 3 weeks into June, was say to Nathan at breakfast, "So is Camille your girlfriend now or what?" Nathan had been mid-sip. "We're figuring it out," he said. Emma considered this. "Is she figuring it out too or just you?" "Both of us." "Okay." She went back to her cereal. "That's fine, just checking." He looked at her. "You're very calm about this." "Dad," Emma said, "I've been waiting for this for like 7 months. I'm not going to be surprised now." He put his mug down. 7 months, he said. "Maybe 8, she said. "Since the dog situation, probably." He thought about October, about a golden retriever appearing in his yard and a set of introductions on the porch across the street. "That was a month in," he said. "I know," Emma said. "It was pretty obvious early." He ate his breakfast. Emma finished her cereal. Cooper attempted to investigate the table from beneath, which was structurally ambitious for a dog his size. "You're going to be exhausting to raise through high school," Nathan said. "You're going to need the practice," Emma said, not unkindly. The summer was not a straight line. In July, Nathan had a week where something old surfaced. Not about Camille, just about him. A version of himself he thought he'd finished with, the one that went quiet and internal when something scared him, the one that confused withdrawal with restraint. Camille noticed on the 3rd day. She didn't make it a scene. She waited until Emma was at Julia's for the weekend and they were on the back porch with the July heat, and she said, "You're somewhere else. You have been for a few days. I want to know if it's something I did or something in you." He'd appreciated the binary, the either-or of it, the refusal to assume. "It's something in me," he said. "Old thing. I get in my own way sometimes." "What does that look like?" she said. "The getting in your own way." He thought about how to say it honestly. "I convince myself that if I stay quiet long enough, whatever's bothering me will resolve on its own, and I won't have to make anyone deal with it." He looked at his hands. "Julia used to say I was the most considerate person she'd ever met, until you realized the consideration was also a kind of hiding." Camille was quiet for a moment. "Was she right?" "Yeah," he said. "She was right." "So tell me," Camille said, "what's actually going on?" It was not a profound thing what he told her. It was small and human, and it was about fear. The fear that something this good was running on borrowed time. That he was the sort of person things happened to rather than the sort of person who made things happen. That he would wake up one day and find that he'd watched his own life from a window again without having fully entered it. It was the fear of a man who had survived by being careful and was now being asked to be something other than careful. Camille listened to all of it without fixing it. When he was done, she said, "I'm not going anywhere because you said a true thing about yourself." She looked at him steadily. "That's not how this works. With me." How does it work with you? He said. You say the true thing. I say the true thing. We keep doing that. She paused. I'm not good at easy. I don't think you are either, but I'm very good at real. And I think you are too. He held on to that. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They sat on the porch in the July heat for another hour, talking about other things. And the week that had been gray in Nathan got its color back, not through resolution exactly, but through the simpler fact of having been seen and not left. Book. August brought the Richmond Project's groundbreaking ceremony, and Camille asked Nathan if he wanted to come. He understood what the invitation meant. This was not a casual thing. The groundbreaking was a public event. Press and city officials and the community partners Sterling Group had been working with for 2 years. Bringing someone was a statement of a kind, or at least an introduction of one, and Camille was not a person who did things without knowing what she was doing. Emma too? He said. Camille looked at him. Emma's been waiting to see a real construction project site since approximately December, she said. She'll never forgive me if I don't include her. Emma, when informed, put on the most professional outfit she owned, which was a blazer she'd bought with birthday money over her father's mild objections and a pair of dark jeans, and she carried a notebook, and she shook hands with Camille's project director and asked him 3 questions about the structural planning that made the director look at Camille and say, "Is she available for an internship in about 10 years?" "She'll probably own a competing firm by then," Camille said. The ceremony was good. Nathan stood at the back with the small crowd and watched Camille at the podium, and he thought, not for the first time, about the particular quality she had of filling a space without needing to perform filling it. She talked about the project in the specific language she used when she meant something, not the careful, measured language of public presentation, but something more direct. She talked about what the building was actually for, the families it was designed to house, the training centers that would share the ground floor, the way good architecture should make people's actual lives more workable rather than just looking like it might. There was a line near the end, "We build things for 30 years, not for the photographs." Nathan had read that in the article. He heard it differently in person. He heard the weight of someone who had spent years inside an industry that often got that wrong and had made a deliberate choice to do it differently, and who was still making that choice, project by project, in the face of the parts of the industry that found it inconvenient. Emma was writing in her notebook. Nathan looked at them both, his daughter with her blazer and her notebook and her handshake, and her absolute conviction that the world was going to be navigable because she was going to navigate it, and the woman at the podium who had built something real out of a place of specific difficulty and had not lost the thread of why she started. And he felt the thing he'd been afraid to feel clearly since October, because clearly felt things are things you can lose. He felt it anyway. He let himself. Autumn. September. The year turning back toward its cooler half, the street returning to the quality it had the morning Camille moved in, except that now it was different in every way that mattered. Cooper and Monty had established a full bilateral agreement about the yards, which involved a complicated system of fence patrol that both dogs took extremely seriously and which resulted in the gate between the yards being left open most of the time by a combination of Emma's deliberate engineering and the 2 dogs' combined physical weight against it. Emma had started 5th grade, and her teacher had asked the class on the first day to describe their household, and Emma had described a household that apparently included 2 houses and 2 dogs and 4 people depending on how you counted the weekends, and the teacher had written home to confirm she'd understood correctly, and Nathan had written back. Essentially, yes. He'd felt fine about that. Camille had heard the story and been quiet for a moment and then said, 4 people, not as a question. "That's how Emma counted," Nathan said. She looked at him. "She's not wrong," he said. Camille looked at the kitchen table. Something moved through her face that was not entirely the managed version of herself, the one that kept the processing interior. Something more visible. "No," she said, "she's not wrong." The Richmond project was under construction. The Durham project had broken ground in August. Sterling Group was at 91 employees and growing in a direction that Camille seemed genuinely pleased about rather than just professionally satisfied with, which Nathan had learned to distinguish over the course of many conversations on many mornings. She'd hired a COO in August, someone she'd been trying to recruit for 2 years, and the addition had given her something Nathan hadn't fully registered was missing: the ability to think past next quarter. She'd started talking about a project she wanted to pursue in 3 years, a community arts center, the kind of project she said she'd been putting off because the margin was negligible and the mission was everything, and she hadn't been sure she'd built the company to a point where she could afford to do the things that mattered most. She was sure now. Nathan was working on a new contract that was more interesting than his recent ones, a health systems database architecture, complex enough to require him to learn some things he hadn't needed to learn in a while. He told Camille about it over coffee one morning, and she'd said, "You're excited about this." Not as observation, but as fact, and he'd realized she was right, and that there was something notable about being with someone who could tell when he was excited about something because he was usually fairly contained about it. "You pay attention," he said. "You do too," she said. "I told you that early on." "I know," she said. "I remembered." October arrived, 1 year since the moving truck. Nathan was aware of this and assumed Camille was too, and did not make it ceremonial, because neither of them were ceremonial people about that kind of thing. But on the Tuesday morning of the first week of October, on the walk that was now so habitual, it had the quality of a thing that had always existed. They turned the corner and came back onto Mercer Lane, and both of them looked at the houses facing each other across the street without saying anything. And what passed between them in that moment didn't need words. They had been changed by the year. That was the plain fact of it. Not improved in some clean arc of personal growth. Not fixed. Changed. Nathan was still the person who went quiet when he was scared. He'd just gotten better at catching himself doing it and then saying so, which was not a small thing. Camille was still this person who managed the interior of herself with an efficiency that sometimes looked like distance. She'd gotten better at letting the management down occasionally, at choosing to be in the weather instead of observing it from a controlled position. These were not dramatic transformations. They were the slow work of two people who had decided the other person was worth the discomfort of being honest. Emma had turned 10 in September. Nathan and Camille had made her a dinner she'd requested in specific detail. 3 courses, which she'd described from a cookbook she'd been studying, and which had required Nathan and Camille to cook together for the first time in a real way, in Nathan's kitchen, which had involved some negotiation about technique, and one incident with the sauce that was Camille's fault, and which she acknowledged without much difficulty, and which Nathan found he liked about her, the ability to be wrong without making it complicated. Emma had sat at the table and watched them cook with an expression of profound personal satisfaction. "You're going to be insufferable about being right," Nathan told her. "I'm already insufferable," Emma said. "You've had 10 years to get used to it." The dinner had been good. Not perfect. The first course was over-seasoned in a way both adults agreed on, and Emma said was fine. And the dessert was something they'd bought from the bakery because the homemade version had failed a trial run the week before, and there was no time to recover. It was a real dinner for a real 10-year-old in a real kitchen that had become, without ceremony or announcement, one of the places where this family, because that was what it was, in the way that counted, did its living. The Saturday in October that Nathan asked Camille to marry him was not the Saturday he'd planned to do it. He had, in fact, been considering a specific occasion, something considered, something that reflected the fact that he'd spent enough of his life moving through things without marking them and wanted to do better. He'd been thinking about it since August. He had something in mind. He had told no one because the only person he would have told was Emma. And Emma could not be trusted with information of this magnitude within a 3-day window. It was a Saturday morning in the second week of October. Both dogs had gotten out of the yard. The gate had been left open again, this time genuinely by accident. And Cooper and Monty had taken the opportunity to investigate the neighborhood with the combined enthusiasm of 2 dogs who considered the world their reasonable property. They'd been retrieved eventually from Marcus Delaney's front yard, where they'd been investigating his garden with professional focus. Marcus had received this visit with the equanimity of a man who had made peace with the realities of the street. They were back at Nathan's kitchen table, all 3 of them, 2 dogs damp from the morning grass and asleep under the table, coffee going, the October light doing what October light does through kitchen windows in the morning. Emma was eating toast. Camille had her hands around a mug. Nathan was looking at the 2 of them. Then Emma said, in the tone of someone asking something she'd been sitting on, "If you two got married, would we get one house or would we keep two?" It landed in the kitchen like a stone in still water. Camille looked at Emma. Nathan looked at Emma. Emma looked between them with the expression of someone who had asked a logistical question and was waiting for the logistical answer. Nathan started. "It's relevant," Emma said. "I'm just asking, because if it's one house, there's a question about rooms. And if it's two, that's also fine, but Monty keeps sleeping on my bed, and Cooper gets jealous, and there might need to be a rotation system." Nathan looked at Camille. She was trying, with incomplete success, not to be openly entertained. "Emma," Nathan said. "Give me a minute." Emma took a bite of toast. "I'm just eating," she said. Nathan set down his coffee mug. He looked at Camille. She was looking back at him with the expression she had when she'd assessed something and arrived somewhere. Not surprised, not performing, not being surprised, just present. Real. The way she'd been on the sidewalk that Thursday morning 11 months ago when she'd shaken his hand with her actual grip. He did not have the thing he'd planned. He did not have the specific occasion or the considered arrangement or the speech he'd been composing in his head since August, and would probably never have gotten exactly right anyway. What he had was this kitchen, this morning, these two people, these dogs, this particular October light. "I was going to do this differently," he said. Camille looked at him. "I had something more thought out," he said, "but Emma's question is a real question, and I find I don't want to wait for a better moment when this moment is the actual one." He held her gaze. "I want to build something with you," he said. "Not because the year has been easy or because we have it figured out, because we don't. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you we do. But I know the difference between a life I'm surviving and a life I'm actually living, and this is the second one. You are. Emma is." He paused. "I would like for this to be permanent, if you want that." A pause. A breath. In the quiet of the kitchen, Cooper shifted under the table and exhaled the specific long exhale of a sleeping dog who is content with his location. "Nathan," Camille said. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I have intent and no ring." She looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not the managed version, not the controlled quality, just the actual thing, unfiltered, the version of herself she'd been learning how to let be visible. "I don't care about a ring," she said. "Emma will care," Emma said from her toast. "Emma," both adults said in unison. "I'm just saying," Emma said. Camille laughed. It was the real one, the one that came from somewhere she didn't always let access, and Nathan felt it land in his chest the way the real things landed, not elegant, not clean, just true. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," she said again, clearer. "I want that, the permanent thing, the building something." She held his gaze. "The imperfect, ongoing, neither of us knows exactly what we're doing version of it. That's the only version available," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm saying yes to." Emma put down her toast. She looked between them with the expression she had reserved for moments of significant personal victory and exercised, to her credit, a restraint that Nathan would later describe to Julia as miraculous. "So," Emma said with great dignity, "one house or two?" The answer, it turned out, was one house with the gate open permanently between both yards. They spent 3 months figuring out the practical shape of it, which was imperfect in all the ways that practical shapes of real things are imperfect. Camille's house had a better office space, and Nathan's had a better kitchen. Emma's room would stay where it was. The guest room in Camille's house had a window that faced the street, and Camille said she'd always liked it for that reason. And Nathan thought about the morning in October when she'd caught him watching from his kitchen window and had been amused instead of offended, and thought that felt right. They merged what was mergeable and kept separate what needed to stay separate, and fought about two things: the couch and the arrangement of the kitchen, and resolved both eventually, the couch by getting a new one that neither of them had chosen before and therefore had no attachment to, the kitchen by a negotiation process that Emma mediated with the gravity of a small labor arbitrator. Julia, when Nathan told her, was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'm really glad." He believed her. Greg sent a bottle of wine and a text that said, "Welcome to the complicated version of a family. It's actually pretty good." Nathan had laughed. Camille's sister, Diane, called 3 times in the first week after the announcement, which Camille tolerated with the air of someone who loved her sister and found her level of enthusiasm structurally overwhelming. Diane had driven down in November and met Nathan and Emma properly for the first time. She'd heard about them for months, and the meeting had been warm and slightly chaotic and had involved Diane crying once, briefly, at the dinner table, which she attributed to the food and which no one challenged. Camille's mother, in Charlottesville, had received the news with a complexity that Camille said was predictable, and that Nathan decided to meet with patience rather than opinion, because Camille's history with her mother was Camille's to navigate, and he was not the person who should have strong feelings about it. They had a dinner planned for December, all of them. Camille said she was cautiously optimistic. "Cautiously optimistic is good," Nathan said. "It's where I live on that topic," she said. Marcus Delaney brought food, which was his way of marking things, and stood on the front porch of what was now Nathan and Camille's primary household, and looked at the houses and the open gate and Cooper and Monty conducting their fence patrol in the last of the October afternoon light, and said, "I told you that street had good instincts." Nathan thought about disputing this and decided it wasn't worth the effort. "You were right," he said. Marcus was visibly satisfied with this and took his leave. There is something that Nathan thought about in the months after everything settled, something he never said directly to anyone, but which was true in the way that the most important things are true, quietly, without announcement, in the specific texture of daily life. He had spent a long time being careful. He'd built the careful life with real effort and real love and real intention, and he did not regret it because Emma was inside that life and Emma was the best thing he'd ever been part of. But careful, over time, had become something else. It had become the habit of staying behind the glass, of watching things rather than entering them, of calling the distance between himself and the world a form of wisdom when it was actually just the place he'd learned to manage from. He did not think Camille had fixed that. She was not a solution to him, and he was not a solution to her. And the version of love that requires another person to complete you is a version that puts too much weight on the wrong load-bearing wall. What she had done was show up repeatedly in a way that was real rather than managed, and in doing so she'd made it harder for him to maintain the managed version of himself in good conscience. She'd made honesty look viable. That was what she'd done. And he tried to do the same for her. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, it was more necessary than that. Like 2 people standing in the same weather and deciding to stop pretending they weren't cold. He thought about this sometimes in the mornings, when the house was quiet and Emma wasn't up yet, and Camille was at the kitchen table with her coffee and the project files she looked at before anyone else was functional, and Monty and Cooper were asleep in their complicated shared arrangement on the living room floor, and the street outside the window was still, and the October light was coming through the glass, and everything in the frame was ordinary in the specific way that the right life is ordinary. Not exciting, not exceptional, just fully and finally inhabited. He would pour his coffee and she would look up from her files and there would be no performance in it. No navigation, no carefully managed distance. Just 2 people in the same kitchen at the beginning of the same day. That was it. That was the whole thing. And if you'd asked Nathan Holloway at 43, on the morning before a moving truck arrived on Mercer Lane, whether this was coming, he would have told you no. He would have told you he'd made his peace with the quieter version. He would have told you that the careful life was enough and that he was fine. He'd have meant it too. That's the thing about the life waiting on the other side of the door you've been standing in front of. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with the specific occasion or the planned moment or the speech you wrote in your head that would have gotten it exactly right. It comes through a kitchen window. It comes with a clipboard and a dog with one ear that won't stay up and a 9-year-old with a frog backpack and a 17-page research binder and an instinct for what's true that the adults around her are still catching up to. It comes through an open gate. Emma came downstairs at 7:15, hair going 3 directions, wearing the marine biology sweatshirt she'd had for 2 years and refused to retire. And she looked at the 2 of them at the kitchen table with the dogs at their feet and the coffee going and the files spread across the good wood surface. And she said, Is there breakfast, or do I have to make it myself? There's eggs, Nathan said. I want the French toast thing, Emma said. You want the French toast thing, you're going to have to wait. How long? 20 minutes. Emma sat down at the table and pulled a chair between them and took a piece of toast off the plate that had been sitting there. I'll start with this, she said. Camille looked at her, this 10-year-old in her too-big sweatshirt at the table that had quietly become the center of everything, and something in her face was entirely open in the morning light. No management, no distance, just the plain evidence of a person who was, at last, where she wanted to be. 20 minutes, Camille said. I'll make it. Emma leaned slightly into Camille's arm the way she did sometimes, the easy unconscious lean of a child who has decided someone is safe. And Camille didn't make anything of it, just shifted slightly to make room, the way you do for someone who belongs. Nathan watched this. He drank his coffee. Outside, the street was beginning its morning. The same 4 cars. The same woman with the poodle and the earbuds, though the poodle now stopped to investigate Cooper through the fence on her way by. Marcus Delaney's lights on, the early riser. The oak trees stripped back now in October, showing their real structure. The shape that was there before the leaves and would be there after, the thing that stayed through all of it. Some things you only understand by living through them, not by thinking them through, not by preparing for them, not by being careful enough or patient enough or ready enough in any of the ways you try to be ready. You understand them by staying, by choosing over and over the real version over the safe one, by letting someone all the way in and finding out that the walls you built to keep the world at a manageable distance were also keeping you inside them, and that outside, it turns out, is where everything worth having actually lives. Nathan Holloway was 44 years old. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He got up and started making the French toast.